let us bring in our first guest, somebody who is very grounded, very down to earth, understands how all of this works. And I thought he was the perfect person to have a conversation with about this, because here's the thing, is that what we've seen this week are the channels who love nothing more than this sort of aggravation in our country, such as Talk, such as GB News. Well, it's not like that around here. We're looking at the big picture. And here I am joined by Francis O'Neill to look at that big picture. Good morning to you, Francis.
Good morning, Sonia.
We're much more somber around here today than normally, and just because this has obviously been a high emotion week, hasn't it? Been absolutely packed with emotion, and it's difficult to know which way to turn and who to believe half the time. But I've seen you posting on social media and your takes. I agree with all of them, but I want to read one in particular because I think that is the basis of our conversation today. And that is, you said, how long is it going to take us to realize that we are being subjected to an ongoing role of terror-inducing rituals that are faked, initiated, or orchestrated in order to shepherd us into planned reactions and behaviors off which the manipulators feed? Now, that could not be more true, because last night, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, stood at the podium and then told us about the new powers and new initiatives that they're going to be ushering in. Francis, take it away. Tell us what you think about what's going on and your thoughts.
Well, without being too much of a bore, like I find 9/11 to be important in this context because that's something where I think the evidence is overwhelming, where we can see that it changed the way freedoms operate, where government allowed their populations to have freedoms around the world. And I think if you can understand what went on that day, then that becomes it changes your paradigm as to how the media and the government work, and how the players you just talked about, the talk radios and talk TV. And also even if we look at, say, from the past 4 years, like I think what we have to do is extrapolate. And I think, like to coin a phrase, what we have here is a failure to extrapolate. So for, say, whether it's from 9/11 or from the COVID era, is that your media and your government are not there to tell you the truth. They're there to like pull your strings around as though you're a media mannequin, as though you're a puppet.
Yeah.
So that they can elicit preordained responses, so that they can then justify and ensure the consent for their pre-planned operations. So when you talk about Keir Starmer, as we come to him now, we think, well, he's just another figurehead that we have in place who is rolling out this agenda. And so the agenda was obvious through COVID that they wanted to have a digital interface with society. They wanted to have, and the mechanism for that was going to be vaccine passports. So now we have a different sort of angle, a tactic, whereby they say, oh, we have too many immigrants, we have problems on the streets, we have, knife crime. And so what we now need is, digital IDs or facial recognition. An increase in facial recognition is exactly what Keir Starmer said last night. In order that we can police these problems more effectively. But what it is essentially is they are using, whether these events are, I mean, we can't say, it's too early to say as the information comes in, but the reason I referenced 9/11 at the beginning is because we have to always be skeptical about what is presented to us. That
Yes.
doesn't mean that everything is fake. It may maybe just be being used by the media or the government to implement its agenda, but it's always in the service of the agenda. Whatever they put in front of us will be in the service of the agenda. So even if we take it at face value, what we've presented, it's being shown to us in order to elicit those reactions which make the majority support the impositions that they wish to put on us.
I mean, all of that, absolutely, yes. And so what he's talking about is a national capability, a sort of cross coordination with police forces around the UK. Again, our surveillance society with bells on, all of that. And he's saying this is a reaction to those thugs on the street, immediately demonizing people. And as I said, and I don't know if you heard this, is that of course there has been an infiltration, there always is, but to demonize everybody who's protesting is just patently wrong, because there are genuine people out there who are hurt and broken by what has taken place and also feel completely unheard. That's another thing, isn't it? It's like, well, I really feel it feels like a flashback to August, I think it was August the 6th, 2011, when the English riots kicked off, Francis. And it really feels like that again, the height of summer in the UK, tensions are high. And it really feels like that. This weekend, there's more planned protests, which may or may not turn into riots, but it feels like a tinderbox. Are you concerned?
Yeah, I think everybody's a little bit concerned because I think these are the kind of reactions that the media sort of stands back and says, "Isn't it terrible?" But the media is also not giving a voice to people. So that classically, they say the riot is the language of the unheard, right? So then people have
Yes.
been expressing concerns for a long time, and they've been ridiculed as right wing or racist and so on. And yet, there's a sort of a common sense element to it. If you let lots of unvetted people into the country, you're probably going to get problems. And
Right.
yet, when people have voiced that, they've been dismissed as racist. So then, eventually, if people feel like they're being unheard and that their concerns have been dismissed, they'll take other action or they'll manifest on the streets. And then there's going to be an element within that, whether it's, and even if there will be an element, genuine element that maybe turn violent. But it seems to me to be in the government's interest to have violence because then they can come along with a solution to the problem and say that what we need is increased police powers in some way or other. And what I thought was very interesting about what Keir Starmer says, he referred to people as being like football hooligans, which again, like you said, is tarring everyone with the same brush,
Yes.
but also talked about restricting their movement before they even
Ah, that shocked me before they even get on the train,
on the
right?
train. So if you think about that in the context of say if even if you don't agree with the protest that you're seeing at the moment, then you think about in the context of protests you might agree with, like some of us were against the lockdowns or had concerns about the vaccines. If they then tell us that you can't get on the train before you because you've been to a prior demonstration, so what he's actually saying is he's kind of get preempting any action. You're guilty before you're no longer innocent before proven guilty is what I'm trying to say there. So that
Yes.
was another thing. And another thing that stood out to me, another insight I had when I was watching that is Keir Starmer said repeatedly, I think it was the thing he repeated the most was that if the demonstrations prevent a fair trial for the accused in this case in Southport, and he said it repeatedly, almost like he was trying to seed in the public's mind that the demonstrators would be to blame if there was any problem with the trial. And I thought, well, that's something just to chalk up and remember, because then if the trial does fall apart, that would be a tinderbox. And he was referencing it as though this was something that was likely to happen on the basis of demonstrations, which seems to me to be very odd because um, this is not unprecedented for people to be unhappy. We think of the James Bulger
Right.
murders or things like that, and people were still given fair trials. So why was he saying that to us? That's the question that came up to my mind.
Well, and attached to that, he was also talking about online disinformation, wasn't he? And again, I saw that as, oh. So here's the thing, is that my understanding about these things in terms of a problem reaction solution is if they can bring in many agendas at once, then they will do so. So you've just noted that he made that reference, but he also made the reference about online. That to me was immediately saying there is going to be further clampdowns online, because we saw it, didn't we? We saw this so-called Channel 3 that I had never heard of before, publishing that this was the name of somebody called Ali, who was on a government MI5 watch list, all of this nonsense that was actually pumped all around social media by big blue tick accounts pumping it out. And he used that as an example, didn't he? And the judge also, in naming the accused, also used that as an example, used both of those things, right? Used the riots as an example, or the protests, and also online, saying that we need to stop this. So it's interesting. What do you get from that?
Well, I think that the government has an agenda which should by now should be obvious to people. They want to restrict our freedoms. They want to have less free speech. They basically want to corral us into these little 15-minute cities. Ultimately, I think so. There's restriction of movement, restriction of expression. They don't want dissent. They don't want people almost fighting back against it. So they need to push the envelope at every opportunity. So what you saw last night was Keir Starmer pushing the envelope on freedom of movement, on freedom of expression, and on online discourse. So which is where people can communicate and reach a larger audience. And so I think that is exactly what you're seeing. He may not be able to immediately overtly state that he wants censorship, but he's put pressure on the social media companies, or at least he's trying to conjure up in the public's mind a need for the social media companies to police themselves. That's what he was doing there. And we saw that this is not beyond the realms of imagination, because during the COVID era, the lockdown era, there was, and it's still ongoing. I mean, even now people think of various social media being more free, like say for Twitter with Elon Musk, and yet there are still people who are banned and shadow banned. And
Oh,
um,
absolutely. They're lulled
so
into a false sense of security on X. That's the problem. He's more free about kind of issues like gender than they were before. But there are other things that he absolutely isn't free about. And one of them, I would say, was to do with thought of Israel and the Middle East, because I think he has certain allegiances, shall we say. But sorry to interrupt you there, but I take your point absolutely. And again, though, that's a falsehood, isn't it? This idea that because there are certain things that I'm very conscious that we can't be saying on this YouTube live stream, for example. We can't do a deep dive in COVID, for example, or anything that may be deemed medical misinformation. So it's happening all around us, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, my videos still get removed from YouTube if I say the wrong thing. So, and that's me trying to be careful and trying to, like, accommodate the YouTube restrictions. So there is censorship already, but there's a push for more, clearly, because Starmer was suggesting that the information that came out, like for example, the accused in the Southport case was said to be to Muslim and so on, and it was not known, and then he's blaming that on attacks on mosques, and so there's this linkage, but. Obviously nobody wants attacks on mosques or any innocent party. Then he harnesses that emotion or that impulse to encourage the drive for censorship. And it's just a classic example of the whole problem reaction solution. This is how they operate. And so whether or not things are orchestrated, they are then manipulated to serve the agenda afterwards.
I'm being asked some questions in the comments. Snib wants to know, I'm really worried about the hotel migrants now. I saw a video of one saying they're in the army. What's your thoughts? We've heard that. That's a narrative we're hearing a lot about, isn't it?
Well, obviously, if you bring lots of young men of fighting age over it, it looks like a military invasion. It looks like a military force. If you see them jumping out of boats, I mean, whether that's the only method of transport they're using to reach the country, it might be a kind of a case of look over here, look at the beaches, look at the dinghies, and they're all coming in by planes as well. But there has been. I saw a video some years ago about it was in the Merseyside area where somebody actually questioned one of them, and they suggested something that they were military, but. It's difficult to know, but it is worrying, because you think, what is their purpose? Are they here? I mean, in the context of worries about depopulation, are they here as replacement? But are they here as police enforcers if things get out of hand? Because what you always do with either police or army, if you've got unrest in a population, you don't use police from that area. You use outside forces to control it, because otherwise they have too many allegiances with families and friends within the area. So it would make sense if they were brought in here in some way to police any future problems if there was unrest.
Mrs. Pirate said, this is why meeting in person or at protests is so important. You can't censor real life. And that, again, is an excellent point, isn't it? We definitely are having our freedom to assemble restricted, aren't we?
Yeah, and this is what part of what we were talking about with Keir Starmer. So if he's going to prevent people getting before they even board the train, and again, that's about restricting your movement, which ties in with this idea that they want you to keep you in smaller geographical areas. But also, it's about freedom to gather and to create the numbers necessary to, generate that kind of energy and also support for a cause. So yeah, they're definitely trying to restrict us in those ways.
I mean, I've been so frustrated online this week, Francis, because I've seen people that I like, literally like losing their minds over this. People who woke up through COVID, and I realize, I appreciate that's not a very long period of time. I've been awake since I was in my 20s. So I've had a very, very long time to get used to the corruptions and the duplicitous behavior that is fed to us. But not many people have. This is not my first rodeo, but for some people it is. But it's really frustrating. How do we go about enabling people to see that we're all being played? Because we're being played, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. And I think that's the million-dollar question, because if you think about I share your frustration, and I sometimes look at people askance and wonder, like, we've got this GB News set and this talk TV set. These people who have got some kind of celebrity or large followings on Twitter, I start to wonder because they seem to be pulled around by every latest media set piece event. And I start to wonder about them because I think, well, is that their role? Because we know that they paid influencers all the way down to the level of Instagram influence. They paid doctors, they paid all kinds of people in the past 4 years to put service in an agenda. So you start to wonder, is this their role to like suddenly flip and drive people towards emotive responses that then produce the kind of reactions that we've been talking about, the kind of government regulations or increased powers? It makes me wonder because but then there's obviously the line where you can never underestimate human stupidity
Right.
but my question comes to the point where if you have seen what has happened, like if you are of the opinion that people have been trying to kill you over the past 4 years, why in the world would you trust anything that they present to you? And that's the bit that I can't get my head around.
It's what does my head in, literally that. And so here's the thing that I want to mention to you as well. Somebody said to me yesterday, the problem is they've got us all focused on the puppets rather than the puppeteers. So we're looking at the Starmers, the Lawrence Foxes, the Nigel Farages. We're looking at all of those people rather than what's really going on behind the scenes. And we need to look up, don't we?
Well, that's the thing. I think if you think of the classic line divide and conquer and have that always in mind, think, well, who are they telling me my enemy is? They're telling you the enemy. Like, no, obviously it's not ideal that there's been a flood, a massive flood of immigration into the country, and that's concerted and deliberate, and it's designed to create these problems. But all the same, um, although that's your immediate concern, if there's somebody who's not safe in your street, for example, but for the most part, 70 million people or a number in that region that live in this country, and most of us haven't experienced problems over the past few
Right,
days.
right.
So the idea is not to suddenly start looking at the people around you. It's looking at the people who have continuously oppressed you for I mean the whole financial system, everything is a form of oppression, like whether it's the fiat money system, whether it's the lockdowns over the past few years, where it's the cost of living induced crisis that they've brought about because of their restrictions and the furloughs and the overspending. So all of this, if you think about it, shows you that your enemy is not the guy that they've imported to make you treat as a scapegoat necessarily. And there are problems with that which are genuine, which need expression, which we can sympathize with, which have manifested in the streets. But the real thing is to stop looking at your neighbor and start looking at the people who are imposing these problems upon you.
Yes, absolutely. Francis, some people are saying this has been the most kind of balanced conversation they've heard about what has been going on over the last few days. And I want to thank you greatly for that. I knew that you would bring that to this, and we need that. We literally need more light and less heat to this situation. And Francis O'Neill has just supplied it. Francis, for those who are unfamiliar, is a writer, commentator, and a wonderful man who walks around carrying a yellow board and has done on and off for the last 4 years. But he also has a Substack, which I will put a link to in the description below. Francis, take good care of yourself. Thank you for joining us this morning, everybody. This has been Francis O'Neill. Take care, Francis.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Brilliant. And I think we do need that, don't we? We need less heat, more light. Absolutely, we do. I'm so grateful to him